Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. Man, it's been a little while since I've said that. The last time we released an episode was when we had the wonderful Robert V.S. Redick and Blaze on our show, and we're super excited to have them back again because, as promised, we are here kicking off our book discussion buddy read of the Chathran Voyage with Book One, The Red Wolf Conspiracy. And again, returning to the show is Robert V.S. Redick. Thank you so much for being here.
Really glad to be here.
The pleasure's all ours. And with us as well is our Discord master, Blaze, from Under the Radar Books. Blaze, thank you so much for coming back.
Thanks for having us, Charles and Dylan. Can't wait to get this review started.
Me neither. This was a long time coming. We've been planning this for a long time. We announced the Discord about a month ago. We had a really fun giveaway. Robert, you personally signed. It was very thoughtful, I thought, when I saw the images of people like posting it when they received it. Copies of the first book, and the Discord has been going as we've read through the Red Wolf Conspiracy. And I have to say, Blaze, Robert, your fan base that we've gotten to talk to for the first time has been really awesome and supportive, and we feel privileged just to have been a part of that discussion. So thank you both for connecting us with this community.
Thanks for making it happen. It was my first time doing a Discord chat like that, and it was really an honor to meet new readers and to do it in this new format was cool.
Great. Yeah, I wonder what it was like to like be part of this Discord where people are talking about your own work. What was it like going through the whole chatting with people as they were reading the book? What was your experience like hearing the fan reactions in real time?
That was great. The only thing is I felt like, I ought to let people read, and not be the author who's hovering, like some, cook who watches you while you're eating in a restaurant. I always hated that. Not that I actually had that experience too often. I've been in those kind of restaurants, but so it was terrific. I tried to keep a pretty low profile. Just chime in when I had something that I thought might really enrich people's experience, and wait for questions. And it was really enlightening what people noticed and what. The comparisons they were making to other writers that hadn't occurred to me, and the things they found that were funny, and the things they found that were, gave them an ache in their heart.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice. I mean, you get letters, the old school way, which is not real time at all, right? And
right.
And that's wonderful too. But the oh my God, I just read when Sandor Ott did X was fun. That kind of thing was really fun.
That's funny. Yeah. And Blaze, what was it like having Robert just come in and chime in and talking with people in your Discord? I'm sure that must have been quite a ride.
Yeah. So normally with our Discord discussions, it would be me saying, okay, I've read up to chapter 10 or something, and here's what I noticed, or here's what hit me really hard, or here's like I didn't say like what to look out for. That would be cheating. But right. And then in the background, I know Robert would come in saying, yeah, this chapter was hard to write, or this section was took me a long time, and here's my thought process behind it. It was really enlightening. I've never had an author join a read along or a Discord before, so it was definitely a great experience, and great to have you aboard, Robert. That was a lot of fun. Can't wait to continue with the rest of the series.
That's right. For me, it was such a fascinating experience to be going like chapter by chapter, almost getting people's reactions, thoughts. And then when there was a prudent question coming up, having the author himself come in, it was a lot of fun. And that is still active. We're already going into the Rats and the Ruling Sea book 2. So if this sounds of interest to you and you're just hearing about it for the first time, please check out the link to the Discord. I'm sure I'll put it in the description, and we'll put it on all our social media and stuff. You're never too late to join in on the conversation. Can even jump back into the Red Wolf Conspiracy stuff and chime in there too. We all get those messages. So just a really unique opportunity. Just these are three coming together with our various talents and just fanboying over this series. And that kicks off our Red Wolf conspiracy. We got to get into this book, guys. And I think very quickly, Dylan, if you want to give one of your famous spoiler warnings so we can get into the meat and potatoes of the book.
Gladly. So we'll be covering the Red Wolf conspiracy in full here, and we won't be holding back on any spoilers. So if you haven't yet read the Red Wolf conspiracy, then now's a good time to pick it up and check out Blaze's Discord, where you can chat with the author himself. But it might also be a good time to turn this down in your headphones before we get too deep into it, because there are going to be spoilers coming your way.
Yeah, absolutely. We are now in the spoilers territory. So Red Wolf Conspiracy, book one of the Chathran voyage. What stuck out to me right away was the setting of the ship itself, the Chathran. And I've always loved the water and boats. And like my imagination was running wild trying to picture a 600-year-old ship with like hundreds of people on it, basically having its own ecosystem. And I was wondering, Robert, if you could share a little bit of some of your inspiration with this series, with this setting, with this ship, and maybe some of the like research or history that went into your passion for this setting.
Yeah, gladly. Yeah, I guess the people have said before, it's like, you know, the Chathran, the ship was very much like a character. And I guess
Yes.
I didn't think of that at the time, but afterwards I see why people sort of say that. So inspirations were many. I mean, the whole series, I think maybe I mentioned last time, it began with this really odd coincidence, I guess, that, you know, I was in another life where I'd sort of pressed a long pause button on my dreams of being a fiction writer. You know, I went off and worked in international development. That took me to Argentina, working with park rangers, and I was in a provincial park called Peninsula Valdez, and you know, I was walking along these foggy cliffs by myself and staring off into the wind and the fog, and just, you know, just imagined the centuries of treacherous sailing that had happened in this place, and then thought, you know, what if standing here right now, I saw one of those tall ships of yore come careening out of the fog and wreck itself on the rocks, and, you know, there goes the writer's brain kicking in, and my social research kind of took a backseat for a while, and I just started, you know, kind of in an involuntary way, just spinning and spinning and spinning story in my head there. But then when I was actually trying to design the ship itself, you know, the one in the story as it evolved, part of it was I knew it had to be really, really big. I didn't know I was writing a 4-book series when I began. I thought I was going to just write one fantasy novel, and I thought it might be the only fantasy novel I ever wrote, because I was, you know, I was pretty serious about quote unquote literary fiction and mainstream fiction. Mm-hmm. But I knew it would have to be big to be the setting for all or most of a long tale. And at that time, you know, when I wasn't running around in South America, I was living in Portland, Maine. And I had the great advantage there that, you know, I'm not really a sailor, but there were sailboats that went just by my office window nonstop, day and night. I could actually see 3 lighthouses out my window. It was an insanely beautiful place to live.
3 lighthouses. That's a lot of lighthouses.
Crazy. Yeah, it was the trick of the land. I mean, none of them were with people or anything. One of them had been built to be a real old-fashioned lighthouse, and 2 of them were just like, actually more like signal lights, you know, but on big towers. But Portland, Maine hadn't been really gussied up for tourists that much yet in those years. We were just a few years away from it, but it was still a really kind of a gritty working port. I mean, Bath Iron Works was there building components for destroyers for the Navy and so on. And right offshore, there was this incredible thing. It was a World War II era dry dock, the thing that you would sail huge ships into to do work on their hulls. You could, you know, I don't quite know how these things worked, but somehow or other it would allow you to in a controlled environment, get down under the hulls of enormous steel ships. And I was talking to a naval historian, about this thing one day, and he said, yeah, you could never get an aircraft carrier in there. But if you want to know what the aircraft carriers of the World War II era looked like, picture them standing that high out of the water and being about 100 yards longer. And I was so stunned by that, because this thing was really close to shore, and it just dwarfed everything. It was rusty and must have weighed 10 billion tons. And to think that there were these things called aircraft carriers, and of course the World War II ones were tiny by today's standards. But as it turned out, when I started thinking about the size ship I needed, the Chathran is just about the same size as a World War II aircraft carrier, only it's a sailing boat and it's wooden. So it could not be built with any wood that's grown on planet Earth. So I also had to think about trees that would have the tensile strength for this sort of thing, and so on. But so there's a couple of things, and then research just really briefly. I did go out on tall ships, some out of Boston, where you can pay to do that, and off of Cape Cod, and but more useful than that was crawling around inside antique sailing ships that various ports around the world have kind of as floating museums, like in their capital cities and so on. Like the USS Constitution in Boston, and the HMS Victory, Lord Nelson's ship in the UK. Those were two that blew my mind.
I can one of the things that impressed me most about the Chathran as a setting, and you could say as a character, is that sense of scale, right? Because you're talking about it is massive, like there's different layers, and some people will never see certain layers of the ship. But then you go and you make sure you have characters that are, like sentient rats and the Ixchel, who are very, very small, and they're crawling through tight spaces and pipes and corridors, like you were describing, crawling around the underbelly of old wooden ships. And when you think about it's a massive ship, there's so much you can do with that. And then you choose scenes where you're in very tight, confined spaces, crawling through pipes. Like the juxtaposition of that really made it seem this like massive. I always like to say it's an ecosystem on itself, right? It's got its own everything. And to see just the scale where you take us out and then pull us way, way in as well is absolutely fascinating. Like I'm going to have a super big ship, and then I'm going to have a character that's maybe like 6 inches tall live on that ship. It's a funny juxtaposition to see.
That was really fun to write too, because it made it even bigger.
Yeah.
Right. It made the canvas that I could play with that much larger. To have the rats and the Ixchel. Yeah.
So this series originally came out, I believe, 2008, 2009 was when it was first published. Is that correct?
Yeah, book one came out in 2009 in the UK, and I think it was 2011 in the States, if I'm remembering that right. Yes.
Wow, it's been quite a while now. I wanted to get a sense, Robert, of what it was like revisiting the Red Wolf conspiracy for you as the author, and because this you revisited the book to be part of the Discord and to be part of these books. So I was just wondering what was it like to go back and revisit your own work and read it now as as a reader versus as when you were writing it?
Much more relaxing because it's done, and I'm sure I'd find things I'm like, oh, it's too bad I did that, but it's published. I don't have to worry. It does no good to worry, So in that sense, it was, my blood pressure didn't go up like it would in the initial writing, but it was lovely. I mean, the truth is, I really feel for these characters, and I think that is probably. I've got this little theory that everybody's strength as a writer is also their weakness, or potentially that whatever makes your work really shine is always flirting with something that could just make it unbearable. I think my favorite authors always have that, like, oh, that's just so amazing how this person does this, and he does it so well, and I wish he'd just quit doing it now, because he's doing, because it just, you skirt on that edge of like being, over the top or too much of a good thing. And so Where am I going with that comment? I don't know where I was going with that comment, but you see that the sort of things that you might want to change. But it's done. Well, I know where I was going with that. So I think that my gift / curse is how much I really, really, really feel for, care for, and ache for my characters. That's certainly an asset, and it can also be a liability. It can make you do things quite poorly if you let it get out of control as a writer. And it can also make you swing for the fences, which is a good thing.
Do any examples come up for you from the Red Wolf conspiracy, or just in general, the way the characters go through some of the dangers of the story?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, Felthrop, poor rat. It's just getting started.
He goes through the ringer for sure.
He goes through the ringer. And this is only book one. But when you think
about the life of a rat, it's not very glamorous, always danger. People are always trying to swat at you, and it can't be
bite
easy.
Off your tail. And,
Exactly.
Even your fellow rats treat you like a rat.
Exactly.
But yeah, so I probably, I would just, oh God, am I really going to do that to him? And then I think, wait, I'm not doing that to him. The story's doing that to him, and that's
right.
And it needs it. And I won't give any spoilers for what is ahead in the next books tonight, but there were moments when we're facing mortality with certain characters where that really, really just, stabbed me through the heart.
Oh.
And, I think you have to face that, right? When you're telling its tale, you can't sort of just smooth those things aside to make it an easier process. Not if you're going to, like I say, swing for the fences to try to, give the reader the most fulfilling experience you can.
That's interesting. Yeah, because it's almost like you need to have that awareness as an author. It's like there's what you would write as a fan of these characters, and then there's what you'd write as someone who's trying to get an honest reaction out of a moment or on behalf of a reader. It's like if you're not feeling those things, how would the reader ever feel those things? That's this kind of sense I get from these moments.
Very
so
well
the fact
put,
the fact that you're willing to go there and risk some of these characters that you work so hard to create in a setting you work so hard to create and just risk it all is very admirable. So I'm the only one in this whole group that is reading the Chathran Voyage for the first time. Both Blaze and Dylan, this is their at least second read through. I'm not going to speak for them, but what I wanted to talk to you, Blaze, about now you've been revisiting the series and you've been chiming in the Discord a lot about your newfound appreciation for some moments in the book through the reread. Blaze, would you care to share some of the experience you had as a rereader of the series?
Yeah. So rereading the series after, God, it must have been 5 years since I first read Red Wolf Conspiracy. I remember the first 5 or 6 chapters, how vividly the characters speak to me, and also how each chapter kind of blends into the next one. For example, the first chapter is about Pazel, and then it ends, we're going into spoilers now, it ends with him being abandoned at a port by the ship that he was on. And then the next chapter begins, it's of the Ixchel looking at him through underneath the port. And then it leads on into the next chapter, which is Nihilus Rose, and how a cat from the first chapter is also present in that chapter, and how it keeps building and building and building on that. The writing style, I remember, is just as beautiful as when I remember reading it, but layered into it is just little world building and little hints for something you wouldn't think is big, but remembering how the story goes, that's going to play a huge part in what's going forward. And I just revisiting that made me realize oh wow, this series benefits tremendously from a reread. And there's just so much there that I completely forgot about, and it's stuff yet to be discovered. And I can attest to Robert. I'm almost halfway through book 2, and the stakes are just raised to the nth degree with several characters. I'm not going to get into it on this podcast, but
next month, guys, come back and join the Discord.
Yeah, but the story starts out like the first 5 chapters is just hold on to your seats. So it just brought me joy to relive these moments once again.
So that is great to hear. Yeah. And that's well said. I can only imagine, because again, this is a conspiracy, right? And even in this first book, it becomes apparent that there's conspiracies on top of conspiracies and a lot of intricate layers. And there's still 3 more books to go. So I was very curious of like, oh, someone who knows where this whole story ends up must be seeing patterns from the beginning. And it seemed like you were alluding to some of that just now and in the Discord of like, wow, you can really like, you guys don't even know like this is happening. So yeah, it is interesting to see that. Dylan, I've known your story with these books for so long. It was almost like a first love for you in a sort of way. I'm going to speak for you when I say that as a fantasy reader. And now that you're reading it again fresh, we have yet to discuss our thoughts of the Red Wolf conspiracy. So Dylan, what was it like for you revisiting book 1 of the Chathran Voyage?
Yeah, so this is the first fantasy book, I think, outside of probably like Harry Potter and then the Song of Ice and Fire books that I think I ever read, Red Wolf Conspiracy. So yeah, it's fond memories and goes back to way before I was an experienced fantasy reader, and something that I really appreciate even more this time around, going back with more experience, is the uniqueness both of the setting. We've talked about that in detail, but also some of just the writing style. I mean, bringing out things like the secret journal of G. Starling Pfeifengart, and then the editor's notes, which will continue. And just like the footnotes and things like that. They add this flavor to the series and this book in particular that is just really unlike anything else that I can think of. It's like both brings out all the wonder of fiction while giving you some of the fun flavor of like almost a historical piece put together. And you can just tell the care that Robert put into telling the story, creating this world. And it what is that word? It's like it's like a realness, verisimilitude. Robert probably knows that word.
Fancy.
Like it creates this really vivid experience of reading that I just haven't really seen people use those storytelling. I don't know if I should call them tropes, like elements, like and the Nihilist Rose letters, things like that. Those stuck out as being particularly unique this time, where for all I knew when I was first reading it, this was like standard stuff that lots of fantasy books did, but that's not the case.
I really loved those epistolary chapters, the journal entries from the quartermaster Pfeifengart and Captain Rose's letters to his parents or his father. Those were really fun to write, I think, because they were in such a different voice. It was like just suddenly using completely different writing muscles for a little while. It was both a breather and a different kind of challenge. It was almost like starting to write a different book, but I was at pains to make it feel like part of the same book, I guess.
And you were getting a lot of love for those chapters in the Discord as well. I read multiple accounts of people being like, these chapters are so much fun. They're so unique and lively and different and entertaining. And yeah, I think, Dylan, you nailed it when you said it just brings a flavor to these books, because I agree completely. It's almost like you've fully been indoctrinated into this like captain's log sailing record kind of environment that adds to the setting. And it may seem unusual in like an elevator pitch to be like, oh, we're going to switch like narrator voices and point of views and things like that. We're going to get into notes and annotations and things. But when you think of the setting and just the formality of the Chathran, and the structure that it follows, it all like bleeds into itself. And like you said, Dylan, the flavor becomes very complex. So I love that as well.
My editors were they were supportive,
Right.
but I could never quite generate the same excitement in them that that I was feeling myself. I'd be like, yeah, and there's going to be these digressions by an editor. You won't know who it is, and letters from Captain Rose to his dead parents, and my editor would be like, oh, that's great, and dragons, right?
I mean, yeah, honestly speaking,
demons,
I could
please?
definitely see getting pushback from an editor on that, because it seems to break a lot of rules and conventions of what you'd normally want from a story. It's like, we don't necessarily want some author who's going to fanboy out over their sailing knowledge and derail the story and distract readers, but that's not really the case. But I could see an editor being hesitant when they hear you going down that path of like, oh my goodness. But like you said,
yeah,
you got to swing for the fences,
the
right?
He was like, yes, I can tell that you're excited.
That's great. That's
if you excite, if you're really, really entertaining yourself, I honestly think that's your best shot at entertaining the reader. Not if you're like nuts and, like, oh, tugboats, let me tell you about tugboats for 10 pages. But,
right.
But if it's potentially exciting and you're honestly excited, I think that can carry over.
I would agree. It's like you said about swinging for the fences and following the reaction you have while you're writing and chasing that. It's like, that's why are you writing if not for those reasons? And it comes through in the books, and I think that's why we got so much love for those sections in the Discord. One of the things I wanted to get into, of course, we haven't talked about plot at all here. So, of course, we have the Chathran is on its vital mission to deliver a young woman whose marriage will seal the peace between Arkal and its mortal enemy, the Mizithran Empire, of course. And this, of course, is Thasha. Thasha is, like, Dylan, you were mentioning in the Discord that Thasha was one of your more favorite characters in this book. And she certainly shines through for a lot of reasons. I remember in the beginning, just when she's talking to her teachers and her, I guess you'd call them teachers, the people in this boarding school who are like, you should probably go, but don't worry, it'll be fine. They have confidence in her, but also are kicking her out at the same time, I think is such a great way to introduce this character who's not really playing by the rules, but is likable and is trying to do the right thing at the same time. It was a great balance. So Dylan, why don't you come in and you were the one championing Thasha the most. Why don't you come in and share like some of your thoughts when you were revisiting the character?
Yeah, I've always been a huge fan of Arya Stark, and while Thasha is a totally different character, I remember thinking the first time I read that the same part of me that liked Arya liked a lot of the aspects that we see from Thasha. And that first chapter, it's really cool. You get an idea. Her introduction always sticks out to me among all the characters. It's a little bit later than you might expect for how I think primary character she is in the book, but you get such a sense of how strong-willed she is early on, just that she's living there with such an authoritarian rule over everything she's supposed to be doing, but she has always found a way to, I guess, maintain her independent thought. I always like the idea of her having stabbed herself through with a rose or
yeah, it's a sharp broken off frond of a rose. Yeah, in a moment of distress, she stabs herself.
Yeah, and just using that as a reminder to keep herself sane as she's going through it, and she's got that kind of like fighter woman aspect, or fighter girl. She's still a teenager, and I always thought that her like spunkiness or creativity, and she's pretty clever. You'll see. I mean, I don't want to spoil things that come later, but it's always stuck out to me how strong-willed she was, and yeah, great character.
So Blaze, was there a certain character that stuck out to you this time on the reread?
Yeah, the character who stuck out more on my reread them more than the first time was Ignis Chadfellow. Now,
Chathfellow, nice.
Yeah, Chadfellow. So Ignis Chadfellow has this kind of like, he's always butting heads kind of with Pazel throughout the whole story. And Pazel kind of thinks in the back of his mind that Ignis Chadfellow is like out to get him, or he has some hidden agenda. It turns out he probably does. But the later you get on in the series, you'll see how deeper those revelations go and what his real motivations are. Even just, it was his, for those of you listening, Ignis Chadfellow was Pazel's teacher when he was on Ormali, and a lot of stuff happens with that. I'm not going to ruin everything. It just the layers and layers of character building that I remember with Chadfellow was just really fun to watch. And also Pfiffinger and Nihilus Rose. Just rereading those guys again brought back a lot of fond memories. And I forgot how much Rose, I knew he was like a really buff and angry captain, but I forgot like how deep his like pain and how deep his kind of, we can call it like madness goes, but that's revealed more later down the road. So those are just fun to remember on my reread.
Yeah, I really loved writing. Well, each character differently, but one who was always fun to write was Nihilus Rose, Captain Rose, because he's so nuts. You know, he's not too nuts to have an agenda. He has a really strong, clear, consistent agenda that's completely egotistical, but you know, it's completely self-centered. But he's nuts enough that, you know, he's one of those characters when he's on the page, he's ready to do just any shit. You know, he just can really, he's truly outrageous. Actually, I was thinking about this beforehand because someone asked me, you know, which characters did you like to write the most? And it probably came down to, you know, although I enjoyed them all for different reasons, if I had to choose, it would be a tie between Rose and Felthrop the Rat, for opposite reasons, but because I think they're both real extreme characters, extreme in opposite ways. You know, Rose, as I say, he's extremely irritable and outrageous and cunning, and Felthrop is extreme in his naivete and also his sort of nobility and, you know, goodness of heart. But it leads both of them to be, you know, I guess, you know, as you pointed out, Blaise, Rose is also wounded. So in a strange way, he's vulnerable, despite his like position of authority and power and his cruelty and, you know, his readiness and his glee to crush people when he can. He's also very easily hurt. And Felthrop obviously is very easily hurt, being this small, partially lamed rat. And but he's also, you know, he's just an open, unprotected soul in his emotions, because he's only been, you know, he's caught the disease of the waking disease, the disease that creates woken animals. And so he's only been a sentient, self-aware creature of human-like intelligence for a short time. And everything's brand new. And everything appalls him and thrills him and fills him with hope and promise. And then, you know, when his hopes are dashed, it's with the sort of absolute feeling that a baby has when something goes wrong. It's just instantly unbearable. So,
it's interesting.
Yeah, they were fun to write.
I can imagine. It's interesting to compare the captain with our poor rat here, because they both have this kind of juxtaposition around their characters. Like you said, Felthrop, he's a woken, sentient being, and he sees wonder in everything, yet his cruel irony is that he's awoken to realize he's a rat at the bottom of the totem pole and gets run through the ringer, and he still somehow manages to find wonder in all of that. And then you're talking about Captain Rose's particular vulnerability as well. So, right, yeah, I think the fact that you have those kind of dualities in both characters is an interesting comparison. I never thought to compare Felthrop with Captain Rose, but that's why we're here today. I think that I totally see it.
It's also, when I think about Felthrop, I always think of him in sort of collision with other characters. And he seems to be at his best for me when he's interacting with people who take themselves too seriously, because he just can't. He takes everything like at some level like really seriously, because he so deeply feels everything, and he's so sincere. His heart is on his paw at all times. But he's also just so lost and hapless that, and smart at the same time, that when I
resourceful.
think he does a really good job of pointing out that the emperors have no clothes. So I love it when he's interacting with Lady Auguste, or oh dear, here I am forgetting my own character's name. It's been a long time. Lady Dree's nephew. The
Halictrum. Is that
Telictrum? Thank
Halictrum?
you. Yeah, Telictrum. Yeah, or his father, Lord Palag, who really have a problem with not having any sense of humor whatsoever. These humorless people, and then Felthrop, the involuntary clown, comes in and changes things.
Right. There's some wisdom to be had in this like childlike way of wonder, seeing the world, right? Taking things more on their honesty and their face value. So when you're in the face of like conniving, conspiracy, stuff like that, it just kind of falls flat, and it kind of reveals some of the like absurdity of it. So it's kind of funny. And then from a rat, no less, giving you these philosophies. It's very interesting to get that juxtaposition. Who else I'm sure really loved Felthrop was audiobook narrator Michael Page. He goes all in with that character throughout the 19 hours of the book. You knew it was Felthrop coming up because he just committed to that role of playing the rat, Felthrop.
Michael Page is a genius with voices. I mean, I think I mentioned to you once, I counted up the characters, and there's like 72 named active characters across the series. And he did a voice for every one of them and made them distinct, so you could tell them apart in 3 words. Incredible work, just amazing.
You could tell Felthrop apart from about half a word, I would think. But yeah, I totally agree. He's a very talented voice actor, and he didn't have to commit to like the high-pitched, higher volume, because like he was just awoken, so he's screaming everything. This is so wonderful. The world is so great. I'm experiencing all these things, and it's crazy. Like, it's really a great way to capture the character. And from my perspective, as a mostly audiobook listener, I was really like getting a kick out of it through that. And I was like, Michael Page is a talent, and he did a great job, especially with Felthrop the rat.
Yeah, I was so lucky to get him. That's for sure.
He's a great get. Yeah, for sure. I'm looking forward to the next book. I'm almost like debating if I want to go and read it when I know the audiobook is so good. I'll probably have to do a combination of the two. But one character I want to make sure we talk about before we move on is Pazel Pathkendall, of course, our main character. And this is someone who I would argue is my favorite character, just because I find his situations to be so interesting. When you see like the straight man antagonist character, especially in fantasy, you have so many set ideas about where his story is going to go, just as being a main character in a fantasy series. But what I am most fascinated about in Pazel is he's about as tragic as it comes when situations happen to him. They're always as tragic as it can get, but somehow he maintains it doesn't faze him too much. He's always worried about someone else or something else, or he's puzzling it out or something. And that, to me, was always fascinating about him. You're told, oh, he was born into a noble family that was disgraced or whatever, and now he's like a tar boy. He was educated, and now he's just running around getting beat up on the Chathran. And I think one of my favorite moments of the whole book was when he was actually kicked off the Chathran and kicked to shore. I was like, there's no way that we're going to have a main character who's going to be off of the Chathran voyage in the Chathran voyage quartet. I was like, how could this be? But then he went for it, and just watching him get kicked out and then immediately getting like robbed and captured and sold as a slave. You're like, oh my goodness, this is intense. To me, I was just wondering, like, when you're going to write a character that is like your main kind of protagonist straight man character, like, how did you go about from like fleshing him out and creating this backstory for Pazel?
Oh, the backstory. Well, so it came together in stages. A nice thing about writing something that's part mystery is that you can legitimately surprise yourself as you go. I think, you have to have the destination clear and sharp in your sights, but you can discover things about your characters that help you get there as you go. And I'm pretty clear in my memory that I didn't fix everything about Pazel's biography down, didn't nail it down like in a way that I was bound to until I needed to. So there were certain things I absolutely knew that are only hinted at in the Red Wolf conspiracy and that are, made explicit later on. And then there's some things that I was not entirely sure about. I'll give you an example. I mean, I knew a lot about his mother, but I knew a whole lot more when she came on the page later on in the story. And it goes also like, so with Chad Fellow, who's a very key figure in Pazel's life, and his ne'er-do-well sailing captain father, Gregory Path Kendall. All these people, they come to mean a lot to the longer story that unfolds across the 4 books. And, as you learn more about them, you learn more about what went into making Pazel. But I didn't have all that down to begin with. I think that with main characters so far for me, I only noticed this looking back, but what's really key is to have a figure who has an ample sort of moral imagination. Now that doesn't, I haven't written yet a book where the main or the single most important character is like a dark anti-hero, like someone we really find ourselves detesting. I mean, I have lots of characters you can detest, but they aren't the pivotal characters of the book so far. And I'm not sure I'm not really moved to write that kind of a story. So my main characters, my characters closest to the heart of the story tend to be ones that have a lot of empathy, that have that ability. As you said, Pazel gets into terrible trouble, but one of the reasons he's not destroyed by all his suffering is because a large part of him has to fight on and struggle on because he cares about other people. Maybe it's just a few other people at a time, but and I think that's a sort of bedrock strength in him. I don't know where people get that. I think it's what a novel can do is sort of speculate on where that comes from and give you possible illustrations of where the sort of deep character traits can begin in a person, but we can't ever completely nail it down. That's sort of the mystery of life. It keeps us interested in other people now.
Was there anything that you knew going in as a writer when writing a main character that you knew you wanted to do or do differently? It was like, I want my main character to like not be this noble highborn. I want him to be cut down and stripped to the bones. Like, was there anything you knew going in for any of these main characters that you wanted to do or do differently?
Yeah, lots of things. Yeah, I mean, and I don't know that. The truth is, I wasn't reading enough fantasy then to say, well, this is going to be different from everything else. I mean, I was and always have been really hung up on language. So I think where I and just writing craft. So my starting point was not so much plot or the basic beats or common elements of fantasy. I wasn't so concerned or even aware of what those were in the dominant fantasy that was being published. I just wasn't reading that much. But what I was aware of was that a lot of the language and the craft, when I would open just a typical sort of commercial fantasy book, a lot of it, the more popular stuff, wasn't really doing it for me. And that sort of pushed me back to thinking, where do I want to be different? And it was there. It was that I just wanted to bring as much of whatever skills I had with the craft of writing to this and not treat it as anything less than a literary effort, just because it's also, an entertainment and a fantasy adventure. So that's where I wanted it to be different. But in terms of aspirations for the characters, I mean, yeah, I wanted Pazel to not be, born to any kind of serious privilege. I mean, there are people a lot worse off than Pazel, sure, but he wasn't. I mean, his country ceases to exist when he's in his early teens. It's invaded, annexed, destroyed. He is, for all he knows, orphaned, but he's certainly, stripped of everything. And he is forced into the service of this empire that looks on his people as dirt. He is darker skinned than the dominant Arcalis, whose empire this is. They never let him forget that. They never let him forget that he is third class at best. And he's also he's not a citizen, and they never let him forget that. That he does not have any sort of safety in this world. He can serve at the pleasure of Arcalis, but even other servant boys, if they have citizenship, they lord that over him and can risk things that he can't. And so they can beat him up because they know that their punishment for beating him up will never be as severe as his. He will be stripped from the right to serve on these boats and possibly enslaved. They will just have to sign with another boat if they get kicked off. So
yeah, and that's
I wanted him to be way down there and not a prince in disguise waiting to be lifted back up to his throne.
Well, in that aspect, I'd say you certainly achieved that right off the gate here with book one. And that was one of the things that I was constantly being surprised as a reader. When you've read like tons of fantasy in a very short period of time, like I have, you think you can't be surprised anymore. But man, when Pazel's getting kicked off that ship, I had no idea what was happening. I loved it. So just those situations alone, I think, is what makes him such a unique character. Another thing that makes him so unique, you talked about language and how you wanted to approach this from a literary standpoint. But what you also have done is you have this theme running throughout your book. And before we get into Discord questions, I want to make sure we talk about two themes, one of which is the power of language that you have in your stories, because there's certain moments where language is literally magic. And then you have other moments where language can do, like, it has put Pazel very far ahead. The fact that he can communicate with other species that no one else can has gotten him the attention of a lot of higher up people. So what I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on more is how you came to develop this theme of language and perhaps the power of language, and if you were intending on exploring that as deeply as I perceived it to be as the reader.
Well, I don't remember where it came from. I guess I can, since this is a spoiler permissible territory. So Pazel's gift is that he's it's a gift / curse. He has been afflicted by his mother with this spell that, when it works correctly, it allows him to immediately learn any language he's exposed to. If he hears just a few words of it or reads a snatch of writing, he learns that language as if he was born to it, and he has it for the rest of his life. And the flip side of that is that it doesn't always work, and he has these fits that come usually at the worst possible time, in which his brain just sort of rebels against all input, but especially language becomes an absolute torture. He can't shut it out. It's flooding his mind. It feels to him like it's pushing his personality out through his ears, and it is just absolute agony for him. And he falls down in fits, and people think he's possessed by devils, and he's come close to being drowned by superstitious sailors a few times because of this. Right. So it was the sort of thing that, once I thought of that, it became a really it became a great tool to weave into the longer story. It keeps coming back, and I thought, if Pazel's got this ability, what would he doesn't understand this thing that is in him, but other people who know about magic do understand it. They don't have it themselves, but they know that with this gift, when it's working correctly, there's a chance to use it to change the world for good or ill. And so when Ramachni, the benevolent mage of this story, approaches him and says, if you really want to help, if you're serious, then let me have you listen to the sort of code in which this universe has been written behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. And if you can stand to hear a little bit of that, you'll learn something that we can use for, to great effect. You'll learn a few master words, as he said, that will give you incredible power, and they might just change the fate of the world. And so Pazel agrees, and he receives these things, but he doesn't know what they do. He's got them. He knows he can only speak them once. And no, I don't know. I mean, I have read other books that are more literally using language as the subject of the story. I think with me, it's just one weave in the story, but it's clearly something that I enjoy. And also, I just wanted the world to be linguistically rich. So there's lots and lots of different languages, and I, as much of as a pain as it can be to do, see as the series goes on, there are lots of situations where I'm writing about characters and they can't talk because they don't have a common language. And right. That's, it's like, oh my God, how am I going to write this chapter now? They can't talk to each other, grunting and making hand gestures and so on. But that's life, Star Trek might just wave its hand and say, oh, here's another planet where they're speaking English, but there's no way I was going to do that.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because so many other authors are saying what you're doing is basically writing a scene of two people talking in a room. But then you take that away, or it's like, okay, now these people don't speak the same language. Now there's a communication barrier. Now this guy can master language sometimes, other times it makes him have fits. It's like it becomes readily apparent, and like you said, the Chathran voyage isn't about one particular thing. It's not even about one even particular character. Even these characters are all over the place, and there's multiple different languages, themes going on, and I think that's why a lot of fans enjoy the series for itself, is just how much bigger the story has to go, and there's still 3 long books are waiting for us here. It's going to take us under 3 months to go through it, so I'm curious to see how Pazel's relationship with language continues to develop throughout the series, because I can just tell that language is a passionate part of the inspiration for the story. So really looking forward to seeing that continue, because he's used one word, right? So there's still some more left in the arsenal.
I'll just tell you one thing. He gets to meet a very, very non-human creature in the next book, and his exposure to that language really rocks his world.
I'm looking. I
won't go further than that.
Yeah, because some of us haven't read the other books yet, me, but I'm looking forward to it, and I'll remember this moment when that comes up. I'll see if I can identify the moment. But the only other theme I wanted to touch on before we went into the questions from the Discord was this. I guess you would kind of call it this idea of a found family. There's a quote, like literally at the end of the book from Ramachni, that I just like to paraphrase very quickly for the audience. And then Robert, I'd love to get some of your reactions behind like how this came to be the final message in your first book of the Chathran voyage. So what I love about it is Neeps, like, you have this whole situation, right? You have this wonderful wizard character who's capable of doing everything, but his power is fading, and he's like, oh, I have to go now, and I'll be back. And then Neeps is like, we can't fight them alone. And then he goes, this is true, you cannot. But when were you ever alone? My part has not been so very great. After all, you've been saving one another since the ship left Etherhorde. And he goes into how every individual person did something that played an integral part in saving themselves outside of his wonderful magical ability. And then he goes on to say, victory is a shadow of the horizon, and whether island or illusion, you can only learn by sailing. And then one of the last lines of the book, and yet there are reasons to be hopeful, even to rejoice. You are a clan now, and as Jari can tell you, a clan is a powerful thing, which Great way to end the story, because you really do have now the stage is set with all these characters through adversity coming together, and the only thing that makes them powerful is their relationship with each other. And one of the things I want to say was, what was the decision to end the book in this way? How did you come across this theme of like, you know what, I want this found family hopeful moment at the end here?
I mean, it just felt honest, really. They logistically, there's this great big thing about to happen, which originally I thought that I would have the wedding scene. I don't want to give too much away in the Red Wolf conspiracy, but then I realized that it was going to be touching off such an avalanche of events that it really belonged at the beginning of a book and not at the end of a book. So, to some degree, having our protagonists, when they finally stopped fighting each other, found each other, realized that they are allies, because they spend, a good amount of time. They don't begin on the same page, right? We've got, the Ixchel are against human beings, and everybody's learned to stomp on Ixchel, and humans have always hated Ixchel, and humans always kill rats when they see them on a ship. And yeah, it's just, Pazel and his best friend Neeps are sort of antagonists with Sasha at first, until they, realize that they've got things in common and like each other. When they finally worked that out, and the trust issues are sort of partly resolved, and they really have formed this closeness. Found family, as you say. I thought that's what they've really accomplished at this point, other than surviving. Is that their enemies have been organizing for decades at least. They've been playing massive catch up, and they've been on the back foot for most of this book. It's just been slap, slap, slap. Oh my gosh, slap, and they sort of get their feet together and slap again. But they have this integrity that slowly lets them find each other and recognize that integrity in each other. And then by one, they've survived, and two, they have formed this coalition, this pact, this alliance. That's basically what they've done. So it seemed like I should stop there, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think one of the most endearing qualities of this book, one of the most touching things for me, is when I think back on this theme you have, that Ramashni pretty much says, is like, by suffering together, you've been able to find each other and find peace and hope in each other through your collective suffering. It's like, how many of us in our personal lives, like when we're going through struggles of our own, seek out other people that are also struggling and talk through it together and overcome it together. It's very much a part of like the human condition, and ending it on that note, because like you said, it's slap after slap after slap, which always kept me surprised and engaged as a reader, and I loved it. And then to bring it home with this theme of like, hey, we're all suffering together, and there's power in that, and there's hope in that, and so far you haven't really been defeated so far. So like, don't worry too much about me not being there when you all have each other, which
that's right, because Ramachni's leaving.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that in a long time. Yeah,
because he's like, I picture like every time Gandalf goes away and everyone's like, no, please don't leave. And then he comes back and like does some uber powerful thing and saves the day. So it's like, why would you ever leave? Please don't go. It's like, like a similar thing happening here.
He's kind of my Gandalf, even though he's a little mink. But he's objectively the most powerful of the allies.
Right, but with very clear, limitations to what he can do. He what's interesting about his powers is the things he can do, but also the things he can't do, his weaknesses. Which is like, very limited in this world. I need to recharge my batteries, like all these other things.
Yeah,
like, it was funny when he was the walrus and then he was the pelican, and I was like, that's so funny. I was like, oh, cute.
Yeah, that's right, because he doesn't come from this world. He is sort of. He's sort of a good Samaritan who doesn't have to be there at all, but who steps in when he can,
Mhm.
and gets too drained, and sort of like, like my Bluetooth headphones. If I walk too far away from the computer, it's sort of that way with Ramachny and his magic. He can only stretch it so far.
An apt analogy. I like that. So I think we're coming towards like near the end of the podcast. And before we do that, we got so many great questions on the Discord. Some Robert already jumped in and answered, some still left to be answered. So I wanted to turn it over to Blaze now for a little segment we're going to call questions from the Discord. So I would encourage everyone, if, there's a lot of plot that we didn't react to, but you know what? You have a direct line of communication to all of us through Blaze's Discord. So feel free to join. We'll still be active on the Red Wolf conspiracy section, as well as now the rats and the ruling sea section. So don't feel like you can't start responding to Red Wolf stuff today, because we're going to be active on it for the next several months. But now what we get to do is Blaze has selected some of the questions from the Discord that we're going to discuss, and Robert will provide some insight as the author. And I'm super excited about this segment, actually. This is great. I saw some really good questions pop up kind of last minute today that I'm looking forward to talking about.
Oh, thank you very much, Charles.
Yeah.
And some of these we did touch on, but I'll just jump right into it. So, Robert, with the benefit of hindsight, would there be anything you would like to change about the Red Wolf conspiracy?
Yes. Yeah, I'll be quick. The name Neeps. I know that Neeps to this day kind of wishes his grandmother had chosen another name for him than Neeps. So I feel bad for Neeps that way. And honestly, I think Sasha feels a little younger than she ought to in a few of the early chapters. When I go back and look at that, that was a newbie author mistake. I'll just own it. Her character, if I want to be kinder to myself, I could say Sasha was figuring out who the hell she was too at that age, as one does, right? But she seems a little silly at a couple of moments when I think that she might not have been if I had seen her more clearly, or maybe if she, maybe she'd understood herself a little bit more. Those are the two big things with the Red Wolf conspiracy. Yeah.
Thasha and Pazel are both 16, so they're both figuring each other out. And I enjoy Neeps. He's kind of like the comical like offset to Pazel. So I always enjoyed his little interactions with him. So our next question is, how did you familiarize yourself with the anatomy and language of sailing ships?
Oh gosh, well, I touched on this a little bit, but in brief, I did a hell of a lot of research. I'm not a sailor. I grew up in Iowa, which is pretty far from the ocean. But I just took it on, it's like, am I gonna write this story or not? And if I'm deciding to write it, I've got to learn. So yeah, I went out on boats as much as I could. I talked to some uncles who sail and friends who sail and sailors, and just hung around with them, and also read. I read, fiction. I read everything Patrick O'Brien's ever written, just the old classics like C.S. Forster, tons of nonfiction. I read, detailed manuals of how to handle the ship in rough weather, and the old logs of people who signed on to ship in the 18th century and went around the world, just everything. And, the more I took it in, the more I felt like maybe I can do this. Now, I would say a real master like Patrick O'Brien or an official sailor, even if they, gave me the liberty of saying, all right, it's a fantasy boat, you couldn't build a wooden boat that big, et cetera. Even allowing for that, they would see things that I have the boats do and say, no, that probably couldn't work. But I think I got close enough that the sailors who've chimed in have been pretty darn satisfied. They'll certainly, they can sharpshoot a whole lot of holes in my sailing expertise. But overall, I think that, the realities of, I didn't want to just sort of wave my hand and say, magic. I wanted to say, this is what you have to do to make, I basically, in short, I wanted to engage with the difficulty of physically making ships sail, not just have it be, fantasy, therefore it works. So I read about it, studied it. When I could have got my hands on it, did the best I could. That's the answer for that.
Yeah, and you did a fantastic job with all the sailing and all of the nuances of what it takes to run a ship. I was very, very impressed. Our next question is actually a two-parter. I'm inserting the second part. So the question is there anything you put into the Red Wolf conspiracy that made you laugh? And then the second part to that, is there anything you put into that just crushed you emotionally?
Oh gosh. Well, yeah, I mean, I think this is actually sort of this will be an answer to two questions in one, because one question I got on the side was, did I have a favorite chapter to write? So, and it's also the chapter that made me laugh the most. But there's a chapter called "The Mad King," where it's one of those letters that crazy Captain Rose is writing to his father, wherever his father is. And what's going on that he's writing about is they've reached the prison island, the imperial prison island, where they're picking up the Mad King, who they have some terrible use for. There's some terrible plan for that involves destabilizing the enemy empire that they're supposedly making peace with. And what I loved about that chapter is just, okay, he is insane. He doesn't seem, the king, the Shagat Ness, he doesn't seem to quite realize he's been deposed and spent decades living on a prison island because they've doted on him so much. He's got this horrible, terrifying sense of personal power still that make people afraid of him, even though he's just a prisoner on a prison island. You know, the warden of the entire island, the entire prison system is scared witless of this prisoner. And everyone in that chapter, for one reason or another, just has to participate in this pantomime of madness, right? Because they're getting ready to do this thing they can't admit. The central chess piece in this thing they're getting ready to do is Psycho. He's completely living in a dream world. And yet it's the power to make others believe is what makes him useful. So they sort of have to coddle him in this right. delusion. And they all start acting like they believe it, and they start going, wait a minute, but I don't believe this, right? Right. He is just a crazy person, right? He isn't a god, right? Right, and that was just so much fun to write, because there's this sense that everyone's sort of tenuously keeping their grip on reality. And I loved that. So that was really fun. Yeah, and I laughed out loud a lot while I was writing that. And then breaking my heart, yeah, sure. I mean, I felt, spoiler territory, but the major heartbreaks are to come in the next book, the big ones. But yeah. So this one, I mean, I don't know that it broke my heart, but I felt very, very. I felt bad for Klust. We haven't talked about her. Klust, the Mirth girl, because she's another sort of innocent. There's no reason for her. Yeah, she eats people, okay, but she's basically a very, very innocent soul. So that's what they do, right? They're carnivores. They eat people. They eat shellfish. It's all the same to them. But Klust falls in love with Pazel because of a backfiring love spell, and then he leaves, and she's just absolutely crushed and can't fight it off because the spell has stripped away any protection. It's just left her, with her heart torn open. But then also, it's a very, very minor part of the book. But do you remember when the Flicker woman, the Flicker who rescues Pazel and nurses him back to health? Pazel himself is terrified of this species, the Flicker men, as they're called, which are these, creatures where they have translucent torsos. You can see all their organs light up when they get excited. And he's just always been taught that they're horrible, terrible creatures who, deal in human beings as, flesh traders. And that's all they can be in his imagination. Then he meets one who doesn't live like that at all, and who's been nursing and rescuing people from slavery all her life, and realizes how lonely she is because she has to, she'll never be accepted by human beings, but she's betraying the sort of trade and the merchant trade that a lot of her people engage in. So she's super, super alone, and she's only alone because she's moral. and all he can really do is say thank you and walk away and leave her at that. So that was a sad moment, because she was this noble minor character who just, like a lot of people, does something good because she's figured out that it's good, and doesn't get to go off and be an adventurous.
Right.
Yeah. That was a very sad scene. I was just remembering that. And I'm like, oh, I forgot about that, but it touched home. And the final one I have is you already talked about who your favorite character is to write. You said Captain Rose and Felthrop. Who would you say is your favorite character, at least for the first book?
Oh gosh, I honestly don't have a favorite. I loved Sasha for her rebellion at first, and then later on, you see it somewhat, I think, in the Red Wolf Conspiracy, but later on, Sasha grows morally quite a lot, because she has a very special burden that she's unaware of in the Red Wolf Conspiracy. She has a certain plot burden in this one that she's pretty brave to take on. That she's supposed to marry someone that she's never met in order to end centuries of war, and she's like, well, okay, I'm going to do this. So I loved her for that. I loved Hazel, like I was saying, for his empathy. I think his ability to understand others and what they go through, and to see himself in others. Felthrop, I've told you, what I loved about him. Sandor Ott, his deep evil was just a different kind of instrument to play, and he's again like Rose. He's like Rose, but not as crazy as Rose in some levels. I mean, his ideology is, if anything, crazier, but his mind is a little clearer, and he's gone so far down a path of commitment to a depraved cause that was fascinating to write. He's unbelievably skillful and resourceful and good at what he does, but what he does is terrible, and I liked working with that contradiction. So for each character, it was something different. Diadrelu, we haven't talked about her, but oh gosh, I think that it's possible that Dree is after. I think Felthrop turns out to be like the character people talk to me about the most, but Dree is the second most, that people just cannot forget her. And she is completely turning her back on what all her people, the Ixchel, think is true and right, because she's choosing to trust some human beings when these 6-inch tall or 8-inch tall Ixchel have been hunted, killed, caged, and displayed as as curiosities in bottles by humans for centuries. So the number one rule as an Ixchel is never trust a human, and yet she does. And so I loved her for that courage. So I'm afraid no favorites really, Blaze, but some reasons to love that are different for each character.
Thank you for that, Robert. And that ends our Discord question. So Charles, take it away.
Yeah, and I know, Robert, you had mentioned that you had received a few questions yourself. If you still received them directly, and if you still wanted to bring those up, then I think that would be a great time to do that before we call it a day.
Yeah, okay. I think, bit by bit, we've covered a lot of them, but here's one I can see. So someone asked, did you ever kill a character and regret it later? Yes, more than one, quite a few, actually. Not in this book. The ones who die in this book, I could live with that. Yeah, either had it coming or, yeah. But yeah, and I think it won't be too long. You'll know what I'm talking about when you see it in book 2. I won't say more than that. So yes, yeah. And some I actually wish, 1 or 2 I wish I had not killed. But most of the time, the ones that hurt, they didn't hurt because I felt like it was a mistake to write it that way. They hurt just because it hurts, just because it seemed like, they had so much to live for, right? Okay, most everything else, I think I've hit upon. Someone asked what inspired the Ixchel, and we kind of covered that, right? It was playing with scale. because they're so tiny. It was exciting to think of them experiencing this giant ship in a way that even the humans never could. You know, they know it with an intimacy that no one else does. They hollow out beams to create secret chambers, and they have tunnels that they, you know, plug and open at will, so they can move in a way that the humans never can. They have secret bunkers in the hold inside shipping crates, and so that was just lots and lots of fun. And you know, the complexity of their civilization came later. At first, it was just the sheer joy of imagining characters with that kind of physical presence. And yeah, that really covers. Yeah, I'm just checking my page here. No, that's really that's it. That's the list of questions.
Well, first off, thanks to everyone that wrote a question. I think it's so great that we can add that as part of this series that we're doing. And like we said at the top, this has been a really great community that we've managed to pull together. We've got Robert V.S. Redick fans who are coming in. We have Blaze's Discord of people. A few people followed us into Blaze's Discord as well. So to have the mix has been a really interesting experience for us. So we're super grateful for everyone that's involved. And I highly, highly recommend anyone listening, curious, that hasn't joined the Discord yet to give it a try, because it really is such a unique experience. I've never done anything quite like this. I don't know anyone has a read along with direct access to the author, and then jumping on to do a discussion and kind of bridging the gap between our online discussion and now our over the air discussion. It's been an absolute blast. And Robert and Blaze, we can't thank you enough for all the time you've already put into this read along and all the time we have coming up in the next 3 months. Thank you so much, both of you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. I know this is a lot of work, guys. It's really fun for me. It's really an honor.
It's been great. You know, I'm really enjoying reading through the series. I want to quickly say before we go that we are reading The Rats in the Ruling Sea. Right now, I'm going to crack the cover tomorrow. I've been waiting to send this recording off before I go in and start the next book. And we will be releasing our book discussion of The Rats in the Ruling Sea on Monday, January 10th. And that's going to be all over our Friends Talking Fantasy page that date, and it'll be on the Discord as well. So definitely you have about, a month, plenty of time to get into the book and chat along the way. We have each discussion broken by chapters, so you don't have to worry about anything getting spoiled for you. If you read the first couple chapters, you can already jump right into the discussion, and that's over on Blaze's Discord, and we'll put the links to that in. And guys, another thing I want to make sure to mention is if you are reading along, you have to make sure to check out Robert's website, robertvsredick.com, and click that Chathran Voyage link at the top, because there's so many terrific resources there. There's a map of Alpharos, there's information about the ship, there's the crew. Each book has a summary portion in it. It's really a fantastic destination to go and check out as you're reading along. If you ever have any questions, to jump in there as well. Highly recommend.
There are some spoilers though if you jump forward, and so be careful. Like if you jump forward to book 3 or 4, I think before you know it, you might be reading spoilers. So just watch out there.
Got it. Don't
and I did want to say, Charles, just because some people sometimes get confused, in the U.S., they shortened the title of book 2 to just The Ruling Sea. So you'll hear us say The Rats in the Ruling Sea, which was my original title. But if you're picking up the book, you may see The Ruling Sea on a copy. It's exactly the same text. It's just a different title. So.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes, it's The Ruling Sea, aka The Rats in the Ruling Sea. I guess in the US, they didn't like the idea of the word rat being on a cover of a book.
Go figure. I said, the number one movie at the time that we decided to make that change, or they decided to make the change, the number one movie in the country was Ratatouille, and they were saying, yeah, I don't think Americans like rats. I was like, no, look over there. But,
yeah, come on. I can just picture Neeps running around a Paris restaurant, just being totally amazed by all the fancy smells and chefs cooking.
That's true.
He'd probably enjoy the food too. He'd sneak a few crumbs.
Yeah, he would.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for coming on. Blaze, thank you as well. This concludes the first portion of our read along, The Red Wolf Conspiracy. We will be back with book 2 of the Chathran Voyage next month. In the meantime, we are all available on all the social medias and on Discord as well. And all those links are in the description. So thank you all so much for listening. We greatly appreciate it. And again, Robert, can't thank you enough for your time and your expertise here. You've added a lot of meaningful value to this read along. So thank you again very much.
Thank you for having me. Really, really an honor and really fun. And I'll see you guys in a month.
Yeah, we'll see you guys in a month. Be sure to check out Blaze's podcast and Under the Radar Books blog as well. He's covering a whole bunch of great books over there. Highly recommend checking it out. And of course, you've been publishing books recently and other series. You don't want to give those a break. You want to check out Sidewinders, of course. Yeah, there it is. So the fun never stops, guys. Show some support, show some love, and we'll let you go. Thank you all so much for listening. And as always, guys, go forth and conquer, friends.
Thanks. Good night.